Hello, APSAadians. Welcome to episode 3 of Act Up. Once again, I am your APSA political coordinator for the 2020-2021 school year, and my name is Joy Payumo, she, her, hers, and this is my podcast. Today, we will be talking about Asian American identity and this whole idea of what it means to be, like a second gen growing up here in America and not being Asian enough to consider yourself Asian, and what that means for us. And on the pod today, we have two lovely board members as well as one of APSA's former advisors. So, fellas, why don't you introduce yourselves?
All right, so hi everyone. My name is Dalton. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a second year computer science and English major, and my position in APSA is that I'm executive secretary for this year.
Hi everyone, my name is Kalen Ganzon. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm a second year pre-kinesiology emphasis in PT major, and my position in APSA is sports director.
Last but not least.
What is up, everyone? My name is Timbo. I graduated SDSU with a degree in stats and also recently got my single subject teaching credential in social studies. I was a longtime APSA GBMer and now alumni. I was APSA's advisor for the last two boards. Now I'm just back to show support.
Okay, let's just jump right in. So, all of us here, our like Asian identity comes from being like Filipino. For me, I'm full Filipino. For Kaylin, you are also full Filipino.
Full Filipino.
And then Dalton, Tim.
I am half Filipino, half Irish.
Yeah, and then for me, I'm half Filipino and half white.
Okay. So just like a general question, how much would you say like you identify with like your ethnicities? Do you think that like maybe just like specifically for like Dalton and Timbo first, I'll go there. How much would you say you identify with like your Asian side?
I definitely identify more with my Filipino side than my Irish side. It just comes from the types of organizations I was involved with at SDSU. Mostly, like, of course, maybe Samahan, Filipino organization, and then APSA, VSA, PISA. I just got to explore like the Asian side of me a lot more and just didn't have the same opportunities to explore my Irish half. A lot of that has been independent on my own. So I just had more opportunity to embrace my Filipino side.
What about you, Dalton?
And then I think I'm kind of on the same page as Timbo because I mean, it's kind of like an interesting like way to look at things that like, oh, like I'm white and half Filipino, and like it's harder for me to connect to the Filipino side because I'm like more like whitewashed or more like in tune with like society or like cultural views and like ideas of like someone growing up in America, obviously. So it's just kind of like an interesting like identity thing to grapple with, but like definitely for me, I still identify more with my Filipino side, even if I'm disconnected from it.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Kaylin?
For me, even though I am full Filipino, I'd say my like little backstory is it was not really it was harder to find other Filipinos within my area or where I'm at least from. So I could never got to be in touch with it as much as when I was with my family or like vacations with my extended family. But I am proud to be Filipino. I love the culture. I just can't speak the language, so I lose a little bit of that. But definitely proud to be Filipino, and it's still something I'm exploring.
Mm-hmm. So at least like for me, I also am full Filipino. A little backstory: I grew up in National City, and like National City is kind of known for having like a huge population of Filipinos. So, like most of the kids that I grew up around were also Filipino. So for me, it was like something that was I was like heavily immersed in for, kinder through 8th grade. Like my whole school was Filipino. I think like maybe only 30% in total was like not Filipino, but like most of the kids in all the classes that I had, like they were, or at least like some sort of Asian. So there was like this um sense of like belonging that I had. But the older I got, when I switched school districts, I went to Olympian High School in Chula Vista. It's a lot more diverse, I feel like, down there. There's a lot of Hispanics. I had a lot of Caucasian friends. Um, and it was just odd to me because a lot of times, like the Filipinos I would meet, they wouldn't like we wouldn't have the same experiences, the same sort of thing. Because one of the things that I realized is that like there's a huge difference when like you consider like the backgrounds of your parents and stuff, like whether or not your parents were born here or if they were like raised here, or even if like they just came here and like it was their choice to immigrate here as like adults. um for me, my parents, they both came here in like their early 20s, so I feel like they had like a good understanding of what it meant to be Filipino, and it was very important to my family that they passed that down to me and my sister. So I grew up with this sense that like I need to live up to that expectation. But whenever I would meet people in high school, uh there'd be like subtle ways of like checking like, oh, are you Filipino? Are you really that Filipino or something like that? Um and it's just difficult when you're, like obviously everybody's experiences growing up are different. At least for me, a lot the one thing that like dinged me and everyone was like, we're revoking your Filipino card, we're revoking your Asian card, is because I'm a very picky eater. So because of that, everybody would be like, oh, you've never eaten adobo before, you're not Filipino, you cannot be, this is absurd. And I'd be like, why does like mundane things like that, why is that how we like gauge someone's culture? Like I feel um like little things like personal preferences and stuff, I feel like that doesn't gauge like whether or not you have a claim to your culture, because at the end of the day, that's how you identify. um Dalton, you went to East Lake High School, correct?
That is true.
um so how would you say that like that environment, like because you also like went to school like in like Chula Vista too, and it's like pretty diverse there. How would you say that like changed the way, or like how it impacted your sense of identity and belonging?
Yeah, so for reference, I think by East Lake High School and Olympian High School, for those who aren't aware, are like both in the same district, but they really have like different like demographics behind them.
Mhm.
Because at East Lake High School, it's like um, probably like the Filipino like percentage is maybe like second or third, like maybe on the same tier um, as like people who are like white identifying, and then Latino identifying at the top. So I think for me, I don't exactly know how much it like necessarily impacted how I saw myself, but I know for a fact that like it might have made it like a little harder to connect in some ways, just because we did have like clubs and stuff, and like those who let's say like um, the Filipino club at East Lake High School was like very like connected with the culture and stuff, but like it was like something that you have to like go out of your way to find, if that makes sense. Like you have to want to
Yeah.
pursue that, if that makes sense. So maybe that's like something like that, not only like in high school, but like just maybe throughout like growing up, kind of like separate, has been like something like I've always had to do, if that makes sense.
Hmm. I feel like at least in college, it's a lot bigger, so you have more ground to explore things. And so a lot of times the people, at least for me, that I know of from like high school, a lot of times the people that I've met that like didn't really identify much with their culture when they were younger, like they'd be like, oh, like I'm Filipino, but like I don't really do anything, I'm not that Filipino or whatever. They would like they would seek it out in college because they'd be like, oh, now there's this like huge community. Now like I have to really look to find that sense of belonging, especially in college, because it's kind of difficult to just like in general find and make friends. So it's, I guess for a lot of people it's like easier to find your own niche. Kaylin, you are from Glendale. And from what I know, from like what I've talked with you about, a lot of your high school is Asian, but there aren't a whole lot of Filipinos. How like do you think that that like impacted your sense of like identifying with your own culture, or like were there times where you were like, man, there's there's all these other Asians here and they all have this like their own little sense of belonging, but I have to like seek out my own culture more.
Yeah, kind of hit it right on the dot. Growing up in somewhere in like Glendale, there was like a huge diverse population, but it wasn't a population that I necessarily belonged to for like the majority of my life. Um, the friend group I had back in Glendale, like back home, was like majority Korean and Armenian and like some like white people. But I surrounded myself with like other Asians that are just Korean. So I felt like I was in touch with my Asian American side, but not necessarily my Filipino side, just because I would never got to. I think in my high school at least there was only 5 Filipinos in my grade, so not much to go off of, you know. So it was hard finding people with their similar experiences, unless they were just like Asian, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, back in college, that's it was not me like being excited to go into this huge pool of like newfound Filipinos. Is more like kind of scary just seeing all these people who are now more similar to you have the same experiences in a wider pool, that I was just like kind of taken aback. So definitely I mesh well with an Asian American identity, but not necessarily a Filipino identity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see that. Do you, do you think that coming to SDSU, that it was kind of like a culture shock, like you just kind of got dropped into like this giant pool of people and you're like, where do I go?
Yeah, exactly. Coming to SDSU, I knew it was gonna be a big difference coming from like majority Korean, Armenian, white people. There's just so many other people in college to gain experiences from, and that when I first saw, for example, like APSA, it felt more familiar because it wasn't just Filipinos. It was a whole multitude of Asians, and that's where I felt like I belonged, and that's where how I'm a board member now, basically.
That's nice. Timbo, what about you? You didn't grow up here in San Diego, but you went here. You chose to go to SDSU eventually. Why, you know, did your like experience growing up where you did, was that a lot different than, you know, the community that you found here?
Definitely. So I grew up in Los Angeles, in a town called Burbank. The high school I went to is a pretty diverse town. I see a Kaylin with a big reaction there. Well, maybe we can talk about it later. But so I went to high school called Burroughs High School. It was a very diverse high school. The thing about it though is that, so because of the way I grew up and my family never really like stressed like the importance of like understanding Filipino culture, they never really like bluntly said like, oh, like we do what we do because we're Filipino. It was just more so they just wanted me to be the best me and didn't really place an importance on like culture. So the friends I had mostly growing up were Hispanic, and they're the friends I have still to this day. And the Asians that I hung out with, that became my friends, and just the community in general, it became just lumped into one like Asian category. So it was like I knew I was Filipino, but people would still see me as just Asian, and then I would just kind of project myself as, yeah, I'm just Asian. I'm not like part of like a Filipino community. I'm just an Asian amongst other Asians. That was just kind of what the community was like. Um, and then it was when I went to SDSU, come my third year, is when I finally started seeing all these other organizations. It was the first one I saw was AB Samahan, because this actually because of the jacket I'm wearing. This girl called me out in class and she's like, "Are you Filipino?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm actually half from my mom's side." She's like, "You should come to this organization." Then it was like, "Oh my goodness, there's a big Filipino community at SDSU." So that was definitely like the first stepping point for me discovering more about my own culture. And then from there, I found APSA, and then, the story unfolded from there. So,
Do you feel like the community at SDSU, or even just APSA, like, do you think that it was more, I guess, welcoming than you had anticipated? Like that it came easy for you to just be like, hey, these are my people.
yes, actually, that is how it came out. And initially, I felt a little weird because, I would obviously introduce myself as, Tim. The name Timbo, I just threw out and it just stuck surprisingly. So I just kept using it.
It's a good name.
Thank you. Um, but of course, appearance, my name is like, I don't look, or, my name isn't like quote unquote Filipino or Asian. So I thought that it would be tough for me to be welcomed or to even join these kinds of organizations, but they were all incredibly friendly. They became like my first family, my first set of friends that stayed after 2 years of just not really getting involved. So yes, to answer your question, yeah, it actually surprised me a lot how welcoming the community was and how willing they were to teach me about all these different cultures and communities that I just was not aware of.
That's good. I know that Dalton, we've spoken about this before as well. You kind of mentioned the idea of like not being super in touch. Like actually, all of you, I've spoken with you at like certain degrees about being able to speak like the mother tongue, and for us, that's Filipino. That's mostly like Tagalog, but like Filipino. Um, do you think that not being able to speak or like having difficulty with like comprehension, because you all have like varying degrees of proficiency, um do you think that like that hindered your ability to get in touch with your culture, or that like it was just not stressed in your like community, so you were just like, well, I guess any of
Yeah,
you?
well, yeah, I can go first. So I think like it definitely is one of like the biggest disconnects you can have, at least in my opinion. I think like, I mean, when I was growing up, like I just remember my mom had like the funniest story. I was like 3 or 4 or whatever, and she's like, "Dalton, do you want to learn how to speak Tagalog?" I'm like 4. And then I just said no. I just said no. I was like a kid, and I just said no. So she never bothered. She like spoke it around the house, like have like a little bit of comprehension in Tagalog, and her dialect is Pangasinan. So like I kind of like know both.
Ang
Like just
kalatok?
I just yeah. But so I don't speak at all. I can like kind of understand barely. And like that in and of itself, like in like a culture that's like very, I mean, like you mentioned, the mother tongue, like it's like very like ingrained in how people interact and talk to each other. And like it really is like a pretty big barrier, but you can still find ways to connect with your culture without it, which is what I've found. But it's definitely something I want to like pursue more.
I think that it was really funny because like the time that you mentioned it to me, it was like when we had like board retreat, and you were talking about how like one time during study sessions, come out to study sessions by the way, um me and Deanna, and I think Johan as well, like there's usually like a giant study like a whiteboard in like study sessions, so we would like write random things on the wall, and we started like trying to figure out what the longest word in Tagalog that you could write was, and I was like, "Pinaka nakapagpapabagabag damdamin," and everybody was like, "That's not a real word. It has to be fake. It doesn't sound real." But I was like, "Nope." I looked it up, uh, and like I remember you afterwards, like when you told us that story, and you were like, "Wow," just made me realize that like I can't really understand Tagalog like at all. And then you were like, "But it made me feel good that I have these." You were like, "Oh, it makes me feel good that I have these friends who are very in touch with their cultures. And I was just like, it made me feel so good to know that like you got something out of it. And then ever since then I've been like, I'm gonna teach you how to speak some Tagalog, I swear. Because I feel like it's just a fun thing. And it's just like a good way, at least in my opinion, to like show like pride for your culture. Yeah, I know, Tim, you also took a class with Ginoong Alicio. He is the professor of Filipino at SDSU. What was your experience like in that class?
Well, okay, my experience in the class was I enjoyed it. The thing was, I I also just think that unless you use it like
Kind of hard
daily,
to like keep up with it.
it's hard to retain it. Just like the older you get, like I know people like that are linguistics majors, they have like 3 languages down just because they're using it all the time. When I was taking Filipino 101, it was hard for me to use it a lot because one, it's like he's teaching us like Filipino, and that's slightly different than Tagalog. So even me asking my mom for help on some of my assignments, like there was a bit of a disconnect.
Yeah.
So that partly dissuaded me from trying to use it more, and just because of my lack of chances to use it, I didn't really retain much. So
yeah, one of the difficult things about it is just that like especially like in college, I've noticed that like the language classes that you take in college are much more like, this is formal, like academic speaking, and that's so much different than the way that people speak colloquially. And it's just like, it's really funny because I'll catch myself sometimes and I'll be like, that does not sound correct in my head. And like it's become like one of our like joking mantras in the class, because our professor has this thing. He's always like, it's better written than pronounced. It's better written than said, because it's really like, it's a thing that like you just kind of have to be around it in order to like understand it. And for a lot of people, and it's like for a lot of people it's kind of difficult, because I think, like, contrary to popular belief, like you would think that a whole bunch of people here in San Diego would speak Tagalog as, or like understand it. But I was really shocked when I like switched high schools, or like I switched to like a different school district, because all of the people that I met in high school were like, I can't understand at all. Um and then like even in college, like that continued, and I was just like, wow, I'm so glad that my parents taught me, and that they kind of just like drilled it into me, because nowadays like old people, they'll be like, oh, I like, sorry, I'm not good at speaking English, and I'll be like, no, it's fine, I understand. And I just think that it's a good way to like try to build those connections between like the younger generation and the older generation, especially because they'll be like, I feel like older people in general really appreciate it when they notice that you have like a appreciation for the culture, like they really like it, and they'll just be like, you're a good kid, you're a good kid. And I feel like that's something that I would like to see more of in people like us. Is Tim like frozen? Final thoughts. What advice would you give to people who are struggling with identifying with their ethnicity and like cultural heritage? Any of y'all can go.
can I just say real quick, yo, McDonald's in the Philippines slaps.
They have like straight
Like
up chicken on the bone with rice there.
fast food in any country besides here is so good. Like
The flavor,
it's just
immaculate.
it's oh my goodness. I yeah. Anyways, I just had to say that. Okay. So what was the question again? Like advice we would give to people who are like exploring their cultural backgrounds.
People who are like struggling, like what advice would you give them?
Honestly, for like I would just advise. I would say that like speaking from my personal experience, what worked for me is just don't be afraid to like share your stories and embrace learning. If you don't understand a whole lot about your culture, share what you do know, so that way others can understand, like, okay, like we can show you this and we can show you that, and just be open to that kind of learning. Or even just like find the things in your life that you really enjoy, like let's say music, and then just start looking into music of your cultural background, but then also dig behind like the stories behind it, like what are the purpose of these songs, the instruments they're using, the dances that go along with it. It all branches out. Or use food. Like
That's
what
true.
better way, and I learned this in a geography of food class I took at SDSU. If they still offer it, I recommend you all take it.
That's
By
a
the way,
thing? I didn't even know.
it's a thing. It's an upper division humanities class. It's called geography of food. Look it up. But one of the main things we learned was like, what better way to learn about a cultural background than through food? Like the way it's prepared, what you're eating, how you eat it, when you eat it. So much can be learned through just food. So whatever it is like that is your passion in life, there is something in your cultural background that embraces that aspect. So you can use that as like a starting point, and then just dig and dig and just be open to learning.
Dalton, Kaylin, any thoughts on that?
I think for me, I think the thing that I really think this like goes for a lot of things is like just don't be afraid to like immerse yourself in a culture, especially like if you're really like outside on the bubble. Like the amount of things I've learned, even if they're not like, let's say like exactly what I would prefer to learn, if that makes sense. Like let's say like, oh, I didn't really immerse myself too much in like, you know, like Tagalog, Pangasinan, like the language. Like
Mhm.
other things I've picked up like so much from just like try like kind of like Timo mentioned, like just like trying to immerse myself in it, or like as many things as I can, like just like out of like my own interests, you know. So I think that's like an important way to like kind of like push yourself into like feeling more connected to your culture if you're not.
And then Kaylin?
Um, yeah, speaking on like what both of them said, it's about like not trying to be stagnant in your own identity. It's always about like continuing to learn, not just about yourself but from others, and that's what I guess allowed me to explore more of my Asian American identity, is seeing other people's experiences, trying to relate it to mine, seeing the differences, and then trying to, I don't know, form an opinion or form like some sort of basis on like why things are the way they are within your life, not like just simply like sitting down accepting things, but a way to meet people, do some new experiences. And then also from what Timbo said, for me, I was like a little tubby baby when I was really tiny. So food was like everything to me. And Filipino food just happened to be right in front of me majority of the parties and like get togethers with my family. That's how I enjoyed and like got to explore more of my Filipino side, was just the food itself. So highly recommend.
Well, there you have it, folks. Just, you know, happy Filipino American History Month. Uh, I hope that all of you who are watching this, that, you know, are struggling with your Asian American identity, I hope that you all go out and look for those outlets where you can just try to learn more. Be open to learning more. Because honestly, there's nothing wrong with it. Education at its finest is one of the best things you can do to make yourself like a better and more well-rounded person. And yeah, last reminders. Oh, actually, wait, Kaylin, is there anything you would like to plug?
Oh yeah, but before that, I just want to say everyone starts somewhere. So just don't be afraid and dip your feet a little in everything. But also, I want to plug APSA Fit and APSA Games, so y'all come through and support your boy.
Those links will be down in the description below. Um, if you have a great day, drink water if you haven't drank enough water today. Reminder that if you have meds, take your meds. If you go out, mask up, stay safe, stay healthy. And yeah, because we all got to act up sometime. And this is me signing off. Bye.